Human history isn't just about the wheel or the internet. It is also a massive graveyard of absolute madness where inventors looked at a problem that did not exist and said, I can fix that. We are talking about radioactive drinks that melted jaws and literal cages for children hanging over city streets. If you think modern gadgets are stupid, wait until you see what your great-grandparents spent their money on. 1. Back in the mid-20th century, nobody cared about lung cancer, but everyone cared about efficiency, which leads us to perhaps the most aggressive smoking accessory ever created. In 1955, a model appeared in magazines demonstrating a plastic multi-cigarette holder capable of fitting an entire pack of 20 cigarettes at once. The idea was that smoking one stick at a time was just too slow for the modern, busy individual. So why not inhale a literal bouquet of burning tobacco simultaneously? Just imagine the sheer lung power required to take a drag from this thing without instantly passing out from oxygen deprivation. It looked less like a luxury item and more like a cartoon suicide device designed for someone trying to set a world record for emphysema. While it was likely intended as a novelty gag, it stands as a perfect monument to an era where the only perceived downside to nicotine addiction was that you couldn't physically get enough of it into your system fast enough. 2. If you think modern energy drinks are bad for your heart, just be glad they do not literally dissolve your bones like the health craze of the 1920s known as Radithor. This was a patent medicine consisting of triple distilled water containing real radioactive isotopes, marketed as a cure for the living dead. The most famous victim was a wealthy industrialist named Eben Byers, who drank nearly 1,400 bottles of this glowing sludge because he thought it gave him vitality. Spoiler alert, it did not. The radiation slowly ate him alive from the inside out until his teeth started falling out and, eventually, his entire lower jaw simply detached from his skull. He died a horrific death, and his body was so radioactive that he had to be buried in a lead-lined coffin. The Wall Street Journal later ran the darkly iconic headline about him that read, "The water that worked fine until his jaw came off." 3. Pest control has always been a headache, but in 1882, a man named James Williams decided that traditional traps were too boring and that what we really needed was to bring a gun to a mouse fight. He patented the Revolver mousetrap, which was exactly what it sounds like. It was a frame that held a loaded .50 caliber pistol pointed directly at the bait, triggered by a treadle mechanism. The logic was that when the mouse stepped on the plate, the gun would discharge and vaporize the rodent. The inventor completely ignored the fact that discharging a high-caliber firearm inside your kitchen is generally considered a bad idea. Imagine waking up at 3 in the morning to a gunshot only to find a hole in your floorboards, a deafened cat, and maybe a missing toe because you stumbled into it in the dark. It was the ultimate example of American overkill, proving that sometimes the solution is infinitely more dangerous than the problem. 4. In the 1930s, society decided that if you were not born with charming dimples, you should suffer until you got them. Enter the dimple maker, invented in 1936 by Isabella Gilbert. This device looked like a medieval torture instrument masquerading as a beauty aid. It consisted of a face-fitting spring with 2 hard knobs that pressed deeply into the wearer's cheeks. The instructions told women to wear this metal clamp overnight or during the day, promising that the constant, painful pressure would permanently dent their flesh into a cute smile. In reality, all it did was restrict blood flow, cause significant pain, and potentially damage the facial nerves, leaving users with sore jaws rather than a movie star look. It was a scam built on insecurity, convincing thousands of women that clamping metal rods into their faces was a reasonable price to pay for beauty, proving that the beauty industry has been unhinged for almost a century. 5. The Victorian era was a wild time for medicine, but the tapeworm trap might be the most stomach-churning weight loss device ever conceived. Instead of diet and exercise, the idea was to introduce a parasite into your system to eat your food for you, but getting it out was the hard part. This invention was a small metal cylinder filled with bait that you were supposed to swallow. The catch was that the cylinder was attached to a string that you left hanging out of your mouth. You had to sit there, choking on a string, waiting for the tapeworm in your stomach to smell the food, crawl into the metal tube, and get stuck. Once you felt a nibble, you had to slowly pull the cylinder and the worm back up through your esophagus. It turns out that fishing for monsters inside your own throat is not only horrific, but also incredibly dangerous, often causing internal bleeding rather than curing the infestation. 6. Long before Spotify or even cassette tapes, Chrysler decided in 1956 that what drivers really needed was a record player mounted under the dashboard. They called it the Highway Hi-Fi, and on paper, it sounded like the height of luxury. The problem, however, is a little thing called physics. Record players rely on a delicate needle balancing on a spinning disc, and cars rely on driving over bumps, potholes, and gravel. Despite Chrysler designing a heavy-pressure arm to keep the needle in place, the slightest vibration would send the needle scratching across the vinyl, ruining the song and the record instantly. To make matters worse, you could only play proprietary records sold by Chrysler, which meant your playlist was limited to whatever the car dealership thought was cool. It was a brilliant piece of engineering that failed completely because the world is not perfectly flat, turning every speed bump into a music-destroying disaster. 7. If you walked around London in the mid-19th century, you might have noticed gentlemen wearing unusually stiff neckties, and that is because they were terrified of being strangled. During the so-called garroting panic of the 1860s, the media convinced everyone that muggers were waiting on every corner to choke them from behind. The fashion industry responded with the anti-garroting cravat. To the naked eye, it looked like high-end formal wear, but hidden underneath the fabric were sharp metal spikes or heavy iron plates. If an attacker tried to wrap their arm around your neck, they would essentially be grabbing a concealed cactus made of steel. While it certainly offered protection, it also made turning your head to the left or right physically impossible without looking like a robot. It was the Victorian equivalent of wearing a bulletproof vest to a dinner party, prioritizing paranoia over comfort in the most aggressive way possible. 8. We have seen some bad parenting advice in history, but the baby cage of the 1930s takes the gold medal for absolute lunacy. At the time, doctors in London and New York were obsessed with the idea that city children needed fresh air to strengthen their immune systems. But if you lived on the 20th floor of an apartment block, you had no garden. The solution was a wire cage that you bolted to the outside of your window frame, suspended hundreds of feet above the concrete pavement. Parents would literally open their window, place their toddler inside this floating chicken coop, and let them play over a lethal drop while mom did the housework inside. It was marketed as a health benefit, completely ignoring the sheer terror of trusting your infant's life to a few rusty screws and a wire grid. Surprisingly, there are few reports of accidents, but eventually, society collectively realized that dangling babies over an abyss was perhaps not the best way to get some oxygen. 9. When you are exorbitantly wealthy, regular bathrooms are apparently beneath you, which explains one of the most bizarre custom vehicles ever commissioned. In 1954, an eccentric American businessman ordered a custom Rolls-Royce that featured a fully functional toilet built directly into the back seat. You simply lifted a cushion, and there it was, a throne within a throne. But here's the disgusting part that money apparently could not fix. There was no septic tank. The mechanism simply dumped the waste directly onto the road below. Imagine driving behind a luxury vehicle worth more than your entire house, admiring its craftsmanship, only to have it casually deposit human waste onto your windshield at 60 miles per hour. It is the ultimate definition of having more money than sense, proving that you can buy class, but you absolutely cannot buy decency. 10. If you have ever been unable to focus because of background noise, you might sympathize with Hugo Gernsback, the father of science fiction, who in 1925 invented the Isolator. This was a terrifying solid wood helmet that looked like a deep-sea diving suit from a horror movie. It completely blocked out all sound and limited your vision to a tiny horizontal slit, forcing you to focus only on the paper in front of you. Because it was airtight, Gernsback had to attach an oxygen tank with a hose just so the user would not suffocate while trying to write a novel. It is ironic that a man famous for predicting the future of technology ended up sitting in his office looking like a confused minion in a wooden box, proving that sometimes the cure for procrastination is indistinguishable from a torture device. 11. Before we understood that radiation destroys DNA, we thought it was just a fun magic trick for selling shoes. In the 1950s, shoe stores across America and Europe installed the shoe-fitting fluoroscope. This was a wooden cabinet with an X-ray tube in the bottom. Children would stick their feet in, and everyone, including the parents and the salesman, would look through a viewer to see the glowing green bones of the child's toes wiggling inside the shoes. It was marketed as a scientific way to ensure a perfect fit, but in reality, it was blasting unregulated radiation directly into the growing bones of children and the groins of the salesman standing nearby all day. Many of these machines leaked radiation wildly, meaning you might have walked out with a comfortable pair of loafers and a slightly higher risk of cancer later in life. 12. The mid-20th century was a desperate time for balding men who were not ready to accept reality, leading to the invention of spray-on hair. Popularized by late-night infomercials, this was essentially a can of aerosol paint that promised to cover up bald spots in seconds. The commercials showed men with thinning hair spraying a cloud of black or brown mist onto their scalps, creating a matte, lifeless helmet of color that looked absolutely nothing like human hair and everything like industrial shoe polish. It was a cosmetic disaster waiting to happen because if it started raining or if you simply sweat too much from the stress of lying to everyone, the paint would run down your forehead like a melting mascara nightmare. It stands as a sad, hilarious testament to the lengths men will go to avoid simply buying a hat. 13. Cooking while driving sounds like a multitasker's dream, but is actually a carbon monoxide nightmare. In the 1960s, a gadget appeared called the car exhaust grill, designed to clamp onto your tailpipe. The idea was to use the wasted heat from your engine to cook burgers while you drove to your destination. The inventors claimed the exhaust fumes would not touch the food, but anyone who knows how cars work knows that eating meat cooked inches away from a spewing exhaust pipe is not exactly gourmet dining. Unless you like your cheeseburger with a distinct aftertaste of unleaded gasoline and road dust, this was a terrible idea. It basically encouraged people to stand behind running vehicles and inhale toxic fumes, all for the sake of a lukewarm, road rage-flavored snack. 14. Japanese commuters are famous for working long hours, which led to the invention of a device that is equal parts genius and humiliating. This was the subway sleeper helmet, often cited in collections of chindogu, or useless inventions. It featured a hard hat with a large rubber suction cup attached to the back. The logic was that if you fell asleep on the train, you could stick your head to the window behind you so you would not slump over onto your neighbor's shoulder. While the theory is sound, the reality involves sitting in public with a toilet plunger attached to your forehead. Plus, if the train made a sudden stop, the suction cup might hold, but your neck would snap forward, waking you up with whiplash and the judgmental stares of everyone in the car. 15. During World War II, the Nazis were getting desperate and started inventing weapons that defied the laws of physics, including the Krumlauf, or curved barrel. This was an attachment for the assault rifle that bent at a 30 or 90-degree angle, designed to let soldiers shoot around corners without exposing themselves. It sounds like something from a cartoon, and it worked about as well. The immense friction of a bullet trying to turn a corner at supersonic speeds usually caused the bullets to shatter into shrapnel before they even left the barrel. The attachment would wear out after just a few hundred rounds, and the recoil was so unpredictable, it was just as likely to hurt the shooter as the target. It was a real-life attempt to use video game logic in a global conflict, and it failed miserably. 16. In 1948, a man looked at a bowl of hot soup and decided that blowing on it with his mouth was just too much physical labor. His solution was the mechanical soup spoon, a device that featured a tiny battery-operated electric fan attached to the handle of the spoon. As you lifted the hot liquid to your mouth, the fan would spin, theoretically cooling the broth instantly. In practice, you were trying to eat with a vibrating, heavy engine in your hand that was just as likely to blow soup into your eyes or catch your mustache in the spinning blades. It is perhaps the most over-engineered solution to a non-existent problem in history, perfectly illustrating that just because you can attach a motor to something does not mean you should. 17. If you think dropping a toaster in the bathtub is a bad idea, You clearly did not live in the Victorian era, where mixing water and high-voltage electricity was considered the height of medical sophistication. The electric bath became a massive wellness trend in the late 19th century, marketed as a miracle cure for everything from rheumatism to simple laziness. Patients would lie in a tub filled with warm water while a doctor lowered electrodes into the liquid, sending a jolting current through their submerged bodies. The sensation was described as 1,000 prickling needles, which doctors claimed was the feeling of your toxins leaving the body, but was actually the feeling of your nervous system screaming for help. It was essentially a controlled electrocution sold as a spa day, proving that Victorians would do absolutely anything to avoid actual exercise, even if it meant risking cardiac arrest in a porcelain tub. 18. Cyclists have always been obsessed with aerodynamics, but the prone bicycle took the need for speed and turned it into a death wish on wheels. Instead of sitting upright like a normal human being, this design forced the rider to lie flat on their stomach, Superman style, with their chin hovering just inches above the front tire. While it did reduce wind resistance, it introduced a new problem known as leading with your face. If you hit a pothole, a curb, or a squirrel, you didn't just fall off. You were launched headfirst into the asphalt like a human torpedo. The visibility was also terrible because you had to crane your neck up constantly just to see where you were going, meaning that after 10 minutes of riding, you needed a chiropractor more than you needed to get to your destination. 19. In 1960, the movie industry decided that sight and sound were not enough and that audiences really needed to smell the action. Enter smell-o-vision, a disastrous technology that piped synthetic odors directly to your seat through a system of plastic tubes. The debut film, Scent of Mystery, was supposed to be a revolution, but it turned into a nausea-inducing nightmare. The system hissed loudly every time it released a scent, ruining the dialogue, and the smells often didn't clear out fast enough. So, by the time the scene changed from a rose garden to a garbage dump, the audience was smelling a confusing mix of flowers and trash. It was sensory overload in the worst way possible, leaving theatergoers with headaches and the distinct realization that some movies are definitely better left unscented. 20. In 1939, an inventor named Charles Steinlauf created the ultimate monument to chaotic multitasking with the Goofy bike. This four-wheeled monstrosity was designed for the whole family, but the seating arrangement was purely insane. The father sat on top steering, the son sat on the handlebars, and the mother was placed in the middle, not pedaling, but sitting at a full-sized sewing machine. Yes, the idea was that while the family enjoyed a Sunday ride, Mom could continue hemming trousers and fixing socks. It completely ignored the fact that trying to thread a needle while bouncing over cobblestones is physically impossible and incredibly dangerous. It remains a hilarious and slightly sexist relic of a time when society believed a woman's work was never done, even when she was technically supposed to be on vacation. 21. Japanese culture gave us the Walkman and the PlayStation, but it also gave us Chindog, the art of useless inventions, and the Noodle splash guard is the king of this category. Eating ramen aggressively can indeed splash broth on your clothes or hair, so someone designed a plastic mane that fits around your face like a lion's head or a medical cone for a dog. You strap this plastic shield to your head and dive into your soup, confident that your hair remains pristine. However, the social cost is immense because you are sitting in a restaurant looking like a sunflower that has lost its mind. It solves a minor annoyance by creating a major humiliation, proving that a few soup spots on your shirt are infinitely better than looking like a sci-fi villain while eating lunch. 22. Long before the sleek jetboards of today, Hollywood inventor Joe Gilpin decided in 1948 that paddling a surfboard was for peasants. He created the Motorized surfboard, a lumbering wooden plank with a small engine encased in a waterproof box. The problem was that the board was incredibly heavy, difficult to steer, and essentially a floating anchor if the engine cut out. Unlike modern versions, this didn't glide. It plowed through the water with all the grace of a confused manatee. Plus, mixing gasoline engines, hot exhaust pipes, and salt water right between your legs was a recipe for burns and mechanical failure. It was a classic case of 1940s engineering trying to muscle its way through a sport that is supposed to be about harmony with nature, resulting in a loud, smoky, and sinking disaster. 23. In 1963, John H. T. Rinfret patented the Anti-bandit bag, a briefcase designed to foil thieves with a mechanism purely based on spite. The handle had a trigger, and if a mugger grabbed the bag, the owner would pull it, causing the entire bottom of the case to fall out. The contents, money, documents, your lunch, would instantly scatter all over the sidewalk. The logic was that if you couldn't have your stuff, nobody could. But in reality, it was a terrible plan. Now, instead of the thief running away with a bag you might track down, your valuables were rolling into the gutter, blowing away in the wind, or being picked up by the thief anyway while you stood there holding an empty handle. It was mutually assured destruction applied to luggage, punishing the victim just as much as the criminal. 24. We complain about heavy VR headsets today, but in the 1960s the concept of TV glasses was literally a pain in the neck. Several inventors toyed with the idea of strapping two miniature cathode ray tube screens directly to your eyes. These devices looked like huge brick-sized goggles with giant antennas sticking out like rabbit ears. They were exorbitantly heavy, forcing the user to sit perfectly still to avoid spinal injury, and the screens were often misaligned, causing instant eye strain and migraines. You looked like a character from a dystopian cyberpunk nightmare, isolated from the world, watching a fuzzy black and white broadcast while slowly crushing your nasal bridge. It was a vision of the future that ignored human anatomy, proving that just because you can strap a TV to your face doesn't mean you should. 25. In 1963, Japanese inventors decided that actual cats were too unreliable and moody for pest control, so they created a mechanical alternative to scare away rats. This device was a motorized box shaped vaguely like a feline head, with eyes that glowed ominously, and a speaker that emitted a recorded meow exactly 10 times per minute. The idea was to terrify rodents with consistency, but they forgot that rats are actually quite smart. After the first hour of hearing the exact same electronic noise on a loop, the rats realized the plastic box was not going to eat them and started treating it like furniture. It was a classic attempt to use technology to solve a problem nature had already perfected, resulting in a noisy, battery-draining doorstop that likely annoyed the human owners far more than it ever bothered the mice. 26. Smoking addiction reached a comical peak in the 1950s with the invention of the cigarette umbrella. This was exactly what it sounds like, a tiny, adorable umbrella made of non-flammable material that clipped onto the end of a cigarette holder. The logic was that a true smoker should never let a little thing like a torrential downpour stop them from getting their nicotine fix. While regular people would simply wait inside or find shelter, the target audience for this device was expected to stand in the rain, soaking wet, carefully balancing a miniature canopy over their burning tobacco to keep it dry. It serves as a hilarious symbol of misplaced priorities, where protecting a 5-cent cigarette was considered more important than protecting your own body from pneumonia and looking like an absolute clown in public. 27. During the height of Cold War paranoia, people were terrified of nuclear annihilation, and inventors responded with survival suits that looked like leftover kitchen supplies. One particularly optimistic design suggested that civilians could survive a nuclear blast by wearing a suit made entirely of reflective foil, similar to a baked potato. The theory was that the shiny surface would reflect the blinding thermal flash of an atomic bomb, preventing burns. Of course, this completely ignored the shockwave that would flatten your house and the deadly radiation that would follow. Wearing this suit essentially meant you would be a perfectly wrapped, shiny corpse in the rubble. It was a placebo made of aluminum, designed to give terrified families a false sense of control in a world where the only real defense was not being there when the bomb went off. 28. Long before the Internet of Things gave us fridges that spy on us, the 1990s attempted to revolutionize breakfast with the smart toaster. This clunky device could be connected to the early internet to download the daily weather forecast and literally burn a picture of a sun or a cloud onto your slice of bread. It sounds futuristic until you realize the practical limitations. The heating elements were often uneven, meaning you usually got a piece of charcoal with a vague meteorological symbol on it. Plus, you had to wait for a dial-up connection just to find out if it was raining, which you could have done by simply looking out the window for free. It was the dawn of useless smart tech, proving that just because you can put data on a carb doesn't mean it tastes good. 29. Humans have always wanted to walk on water, and in the 1960s, several inventors tried to make it happen with water walking shoes. These were essentially two miniature pontoon boats that you strapped to your feet, accompanied by ski poles for balance. The marketing showed people gracefully gliding across lakes, but the reality was a physical nightmare. The moment your legs drifted slightly apart, you were forced into an involuntary split, straining your groin muscles while trying to keep two independent boats moving in a straight line. It was an exhausting, core-destroying workout that usually ended with the user capsizing and hanging upside down in the water with giant foam blocks strapped to their ankles. It turns out that boats are designed as one piece for a very good reason. 30. In 1961, the Goodyear Tire Company decided that boring black rubber was out of style and introduced the Illuminated neothane tire. These were translucent tires filled with light bulbs that glowed brightly in the dark, allowing drivers to match their tire color to their outfit or car paint. They looked absolutely incredible, like something from a sci-fi movie, but they had a fatal flaw. The synthetic material turned into a gooey mess when the driver braked too hard or drove too fast, and the glass bulbs inside had a tendency to shatter on impact. They were dangerously impractical, expensive to produce, and blinded oncoming traffic. But for a brief shining moment, you could drive a car that looked like a rolling jukebox before it inevitably melted onto the asphalt. 31. We live in a world where we are constantly connected, but the shower hood of the 1970s took availability to a psychotic level. This was a bizarre plastic helmet that completely encased your head and neck, featuring a watertight seal and sound-permeable holes, or a built-in receiver space. The sole purpose was to allow you to answer the telephone while you were scrubbing yourself in the shower, because apparently, the thought of missing a phone call for the 10 minutes it takes to wash your body was simply unbearable. You would stand there, naked, wearing a plastic space helmet, screaming over the sound of running water to talk to someone who probably just wanted to sell you insurance. It was the ultimate invasion of privacy, invited into your own bathroom by your own insecurity. 32. If you have ever worried about ruining your expensive suede loafers in a drizzle, you might be the target market for shoe umbrellas. These are literal miniature umbrellas that clip onto the toe of your shoe, expanding to cover the front part of your foot. While they might keep the very tip of your shoe dry, they do absolutely nothing for the sides, the heels, or your ankles, which will still get soaked. Furthermore, walking with two tiny canopies attached to your feet requires a ridiculous high-stepping gait to avoid tripping over your own accessories. You end up looking like a malfunctioning cartoon character tiptoeing through puddles, proving that some people will sacrifice their entire dignity just to protect a small patch of leather from a little bit of water. 33. In the 1980s, before noise-canceling headphones saved our collective sanity, some genius decided that music should not be a private experience but a public punishment. Enter the stereo vest, a fashion crime that integrated hardwired speakers directly into the shoulder pads of a puffy jacket. The marketing claimed it allowed you to feel the music, creating a personal surround sound system wherever you went. In reality, it turned the wearer into a walking nuisance that everyone within a 3-block radius immediately hated. You looked like a rejected extra from a low-budget cyborg movie, weighed down by massive D-cell batteries and cheap plastic casings. It was the ultimate expression of narcissism, forcing strangers on the bus to listen to your terrible mixtape while you stood there looking smug in a vibrating polyester waistcoat, blissfully unaware that you were the most annoying person on Earth. So we have gone from radioactive water that dissolves your bones to literal cages for babies hanging over city streets. It is pretty clear that just because you can patent an idea does not mean you should actually build it. Now, here is a question that will test your survival instincts. If you were forced to use one of these disasters every day for a month, would you choose the radioactive energy drink or the flamethrower car exhaust grill? I want to see your choices in the comments below. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more historical madness that schools won't teach you.